welcome everyone to our Underwater Homeowners Association meeting for May. We just finished wrapping up the 51st Earth Month. We had to celebrate the 50th Earth Month in isolation. We thought that our planet, 50 years later, would have done a little bit of a better job. As you know, it continued through those 50 years to continue to pollute and put carbon in our atmosphere and continue with its insatiable desire addiction to fossil fuels. And what the Underwater HOA does is it tries to get a cadre of individuals to not worry about the here and now, although clearly our families and in our lives and our economy matter today to us, but we also need to have an eye to the future and how maybe thinking ahead, being a little bit more practical today, suffering, but not in all cases, a little bit, sacrificing a little bit more. If you look at clean energy and clean jobs, it's not that big of a sacrifice. It's actually a pretty good way of revitalizing our economy. But being focused not just on the here and now, but on the future is what this Underwater Homeowners Association aims to do. In fact, the very title of the organization presumes that there will be portions of Miami-Dade underwater permanently, something that isn't the case at this time. So the group, although it has a funky, sort of bizarre, witty name that could be a little macabre, it's really an aspirational, hopeful group. And by training the new leaders, by inviting people like today's guest speaker who will allow us to hear from the very generation that will be most impacted by what we do or fail to do today, is what this art project, this environmental art project called the Underwater Homeowners Association, a socially engaged art project is all about. So not to take too much time from us, we do these meetings on a monthly basis. We have since our current mayor swore everyone into office and gave the oath of office to our chair, who can't join us today. On January the 9th of 2019, we have met every single month, and we do so again today in time. And I think the time is getting near. These meetings will be live meetings again, and I think that'll bring a different dynamic to the group. The meetings will be at Pinecrest Gardens, where this all started and is based. So with that, I'd like to introduce, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Jamal, who is our coordinator and intern through our master's program at the University of Miami, and Adam Roberti, who is the studio manager. He manages the entire social practice, including this particular portion of our social practice called the Underwater HOA. I'd like to thank them. I want to acknowledge our members since day one, but also an elected official for being with us here. Leanne Thallam is actually the person that Underwater Homeowners Associations are trying to impact, people in elected office, so that they can best use our current resources to prepare for a future with rising seas. So it's always wonderful to have her in the room. And with that, I want to turn it over to Adam Roberti so that he could say hi and also introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Xavier. Hello, everybody. I'm going to jump right into the introduction. Super excited to have my friend Gabby Rodriguez here today. So Gabby is based in Miami, Florida. She uses she, her, hers pronouns. She's a former student at Florida International University and a future student at Yale, about to study environmental studies in the master's program there. She's also an educator and organizer who holds a strong passion for environmental and climate justice and education. She's currently a program coordinator at the CLIO Institute, helping to develop and manage CLIO's various youth programs. Much of her work revolves around helping to bring climate change education to students across Miami, especially those in under-resourced communities. Gabby also co-hosts CLIO's youth-led podcast, House on Fire, which aims to educate its listeners on the climate crisis and empower them to act through impactful conversations with leaders in the climate movement. Moreover, she participates in local climate and social justice advocacy with the Sunrise Movement and Gen Cleo. So, Gabby, you do a ton of stuff. I could, you have an even longer bio than that, but I'll leave it there.
Well, I'd like to add one small thing to it. She also is the recipient of a really prestigious award at the Honors College at Florida International University. It's actually the highest award scholarship that anyone can get, purely merit-based. She outcompeted a bunch of people with really high GPAs and a lot of smarts to win a, can I say the number? Are you okay with that? I'm good with that. A $10,000 scholarship that she's going to take with her to New Haven. But more importantly, most importantly, she's going to bring that back to Miami as she is going to continue working here in our community, bring all that knowledge back to help build a better and stronger Miami as the sea levels rise. So congratulations on winning that incredible scholarship. You're locally at our community level, our pride and joy, and how awesome to send you off to New Haven with the highest scholarship that FIU can give any student. So congratulations. And with that, we'd love to hear your voice.
Man, thank you all so much. Didn't expect to be kudos so much. Thank you all for inviting me. It's a pleasure to speak with you all today, and I love the topic, and yeah, I'm super excited. So thank you all again. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Just give me one sec. And also, I just want to say I love how everybody's background is so blue. I think that's so funny. Command tab. Give me one sec.
Do you have the ability to share screen? It should allow you.
Yeah, I was just opening up the PowerPoint. Okay, can you see my screen fine?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. Okay, cool. So I guess I'll get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Gabriela Rodriguez, and I'm a program coordinator at the Cleo Institute, as Adam and X mentioned. And I like to consider myself a student, an organizer, and an educator because it kind of encompasses the main three things that I do. I'm always learning. That's first and foremost. Second, I'm an educator, so I'll talk a little bit about that when I talk about my work with Cleo. And I'm an organizer, as Adam mentioned. I work closely with the Sunrise Movement and Cleo's youth advocacy group called Gen Cleo. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, not a little bit, a lot about my journey through environmental and climate work. And I'm going to use that story to explain to you how young people are driving this movement and improving this movement, and how that journey as a young person in Miami has definitely shaped my perspectives and my values regarding the climate crisis. So thank you all again for being here, and I'll get started. So everything that I do today definitely started with my upbringing. I was born and raised here in Miami, and it's, as you know, an incredibly diverse metropolitan city. It's bordered by 2 beautiful national parks. And I like to always acknowledge that my passion for protecting the people and the planet definitely started with my Latina roots. I'm Colombian Polish, and my affinity for the environment that I was so graciously given as a young child growing up in Miami. So, you know, I grew up knowing that I wanted to learn more about the environment, and that I wanted to work in the environment, and I wanted to protect people and animals and plants and landscapes. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm lucky that I had that growing up. And so I started college 4 years ago at Florida International University here in Miami. I graduated 2 weekends ago. And right away when I started college, I got involved on campus, and I became the lead outreach and education intern for FIU's Office of Sustainability. So for about 2 years, I helped FIU increase the student body's awareness of local environmental issues through different events and panels and presentations and just different opportunities. This is literally the only picture I had. I know it's so goofy, but the only one I could find of my job there, because we were always so busy doing stuff. And it was so great to work at FIU. Something else that FIU gave me was, as part of the Honors College, as Xavier mentioned, I was able to study abroad in Costa Rica. And this allowed me to start exploring parts of the environmental field that I didn't get to explore before, like sustainable tourism and how we integrate local people into decision making. And what was so incredible about this trip was that I was able to see the things that I was learning in my textbooks at FIU in person. And that's what study abroad is for. And on top of that, I got to bond with some incredibly inspiring and motivating young people who also just wanted to simply learn more about how we could take care of this planet. Another opportunity that I had while being a student at FIU was going to Washington, D.C. And I think this was when my relationship with environmental work went to another level. So at this point, I was sort of ending my position at the Office of Sustainability and not really sure if I wanted to continue in environmental education. I just didn't really know what I wanted to do in this field exactly. And I had always been slightly interested in environmental policy and advocacy, but I was always in my bubble of education and events. But when I went to DC with FIU, I realized that I did have an interest in policy and advocacy. And I realized that although education is incredibly important, and I still believe that today, there's also big impact in getting involved civically. And so at this point in my life, I knew what I was going to do something with the environment after college, but I didn't really know exactly what. I loved environmental education. I loved learning about environmental justice. For some reason, oddly specifically, sustainable tourism, different things like that, and just a bunch of things all over the place. But then I was in a class and something happened. I was at FIU one day and I was sitting in a classroom and I was attending a lecture for one of my classes. And in the last few minutes of that lecture, my professor started to introduce the topic of sea level rise, very basic, like 101 sea level rise. And the first slide that he projected showed a very normal looking map of Miami-Dade County. But then the second slide he projected showed that same map with 2 feet of sea level rise. So you could start to see pockets of blue start to cover the land. Then with the next slide, 4 feet of sea level rise, more blue, then 6 feet, more blue, 8 feet, more blue, 12 feet. And with no time left in that class, my city was underwater. And that visualization made my chest so tight as if the sea was filling my lungs in that room. And so I was struck with so much anxiety as I walked out of that classroom. And I immediately thought to myself, what will happen to the people and the places that I love? And as I got into my car and started driving back home, I realized that I needed to turn my fear into action. And so before I know it, that's what I'm doing. I'm walking into Miami City Hall. The commissioners that day were voting on passing a climate emergency declaration. And should it pass, the city of Miami would recognize climate change as an existential threat and commit to bold emission cuts. So when I walked in and I sat down in that room, my friend whispered to me, they're taking public comments, like, do you want to speak? Do you think you're ready to speak? And I was not ready. I did not know that that was an option for us. So despite knowing how little time I would have to prepare a speech, because I wasn't expecting to, I said yes. I told him yes, I wanted to. And ironically, I spoke mainly about how little time Miami has to act. And so incredibly, this resolution passed with a unanimous vote. And we got the city of Miami to pass a climate emergency declaration. And so from this moment on, I realized that using my voice worked. And that was really pivotal for me. I was, from that moment on, totally propelled into climate advocacy. And so in a matter of weeks, I went from wondering if advocacy was something I would even want to dabble in to advocacy becoming my world. I began speaking at government meetings, and I began attending marches and attending strikes, calling upon our governments across Miami-Dade County to do something about this crisis. And so along the way, I met some of the most incredible people that I know today, people of all ages, all races, all classes, all walks of life, and all these people coming together because our futures and our children's futures are under attack. But it was really young people, specifically people my age, who pulled me into this work. And I really want to acknowledge that, because if it wasn't for the energy of those young people, I would not be doing what I'm doing today, and I would not be where I am today. Young people showed me that this was an issue that was worth fighting for, and that it actually works when we go and we use our voices. And so about a month later, I ended up traveling to Boston with some other climate activists for a training about how we could advance more climate emergency declarations in Miami. and in our local community in general, even like at a state level. And so this trip was also really pivotal for me because after this trip, I went from being an activist to being an organizer. And what I mean is that I went from like simply attending marches to helping to plan them. I went from speaking at government meetings to helping to draft speeches for them with my friends. And this was, again, all thanks to young people in Miami who inspired me and brought me into this movement. Young people like you see in this picture, like JP Mejia, which some of you may recognize, Nicole Gazzo, which some of you I know, and Sammy Gazda. These are some of Miami's most prominent leading climate organizers, and they're just teenagers. They're just teenagers, and they're literally pouring their youth into this cause for Miami. And so when I came back from this trip in Boston, JP and I actually immediately met with past commissioner, now Miami-Dade County Mayor, Daniela Levine Cava. And we met with her to discuss the possibility of county-wide climate emergency declaration. And I like to include this because it's moments like these where I realized that it's moments like these that showed me that the power that young people have, the fact that she was willing to meet with 2 kids, and realizing this power totally changed my perspective on the climate crisis. As I mentioned earlier, I went from being incredibly scared of climate change, even just scared of learning about it and hearing about it, to now falling in love with solving it and falling in love with the solutions, falling in love with advocacy and education and organizing, because I saw my efforts amount to change alongside young people like me. And I realized that the climate crisis is not just a catastrophe, it's an opportunity really to change everything we know about the world. And it's really young people, again, that showed me this and taught me this, that it is an opportunity. And so young people are driving this movement every single day, whether you see it or not. And I'm not just talking anymore about climate advocacy, I'm also talking about climate education, and I'm talking about policy, literally. In Congress, young people are affecting policy, climate science, climate media and art, like you all are doing. Young people are improving and they're shaping this movement every single day. And this is where I want to pivot to my position now, my professional position, because my job that I have today is actually all thanks to a young person. Today, I am a program coordinator at the Clio Institute, which is, if you don't know, a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to increasing climate change education and advocacy in Florida. And in 2019, a high schooler in Miami named Nicole Gazzo, which some of you know, she came to the Clio Institute and she said that she wanted to see more conversations about climate change in her classes. She was learning about it through her AP environmental class, but she felt like everybody else in her school should also be learning about it. And so when Clio received this from her, we recognized, well, I shouldn't say we because I wasn't there yet, but Clio recognized the lack of climate education that was in our schooling system. And so Clio agreed with Nicole and said, okay, cool, we're going to create a whole program around what you just said because it's so needed. And so to help take on this task, Clio hired me. And during the summer of 2019, I started working with them to develop a program called Climate Resilient Schools. And then that following fall, we launched the program. And so in my position running Clio's Climate Resilient Schools program, I am helping to bring climate change education and skills to students and teachers across our county, and also across Florida now. So this means that I teach a lot of students about the climate crisis in their classrooms virtually for now. We train teachers on climate change and we give them a bunch of resources to incorporate it into their curricula. And we're constantly holding educational events and advocacy opportunities for the kids to participate in. And really, that's just like the main summary of it. There's so much that goes behind this program. And one very, very important part of my job is a specific part of this program called Climate Resilient Schools. Called the Climate Leadership Information Program. There's so many acronyms, called CLIP. And CLIP exists because of Nicole, like the same girl I mentioned earlier. She didn't just want to see like more conversations about climate change in her classroom, but she wanted to see students teach each other about climate change in her classrooms, because Nicole understood that the reality is that people like to hear about climate change from people they trust and people they identify with. That's just something that's been found. And because of that, I helped Clio create CLIP. And what we're doing with this program, we're in our second year now, we're training students in high schools across Miami into climate certified speakers. And they're teaching their peers about climate change in their classrooms. They're running campaigns. They're participating in all these activities. It's like a club about climate change in high school. And so just to give you an idea of our impact, today our kids have done over 50 peer-to-peer presentations about climate change across Miami-Dade County. So meaning students teaching students. And with that, those kids have taught about 1,000 other students in Miami about climate change. And really, it's because of Nicole's idea that we even get to do this, that we at Clio are driving peer-to-peer education about climate change and transforming these students into change makers. It's really thanks to one young person that had a great idea. And so just like through my activism, which I talked a little bit about earlier, through my job at Clio, I've also met some incredible young people. It's like everywhere I go, I meet incredible young people. And every single school that I work at is filled with young people who just want to help tackle this problem. They want to help tackle the climate crisis. They want to talk about it with their friends. They want to become activists. They want to reduce their carbon footprints. And so after 2 years in this work, it's become really obvious to me that young people really genuinely want to protect the other people and the places that they love. And so I feel lucky that today I get to help them do that. I help students become climate communicators and climate activists. And it's just funny because I went from becoming a climate activist myself to now empowering other students to do the same in such a short amount of time. But that sounds all fun and dandy, but my story doesn't really end there because something in this work started to bother me for a while. Last summer, we all witnessed an uproar for racial and social justice after the murder of George Floyd, and it forced a lot of environmental groups to revisit their racist histories, and it forced many climate organizations to do the same and to reevaluate what their mission really is. It forced a lot of us, probably all of us on this Zoom call, to really question our relationship with racism, rethink our values, unlearn many things, adopt new principles. It was an incredibly introspective time for everybody, and I don't think I need to make that more obvious. But the uprisings last summer showed me something very profound, and it showed me that young people are asking questions that I feel are a little bit risky and provocative and important. And I'm talking specifically about young people in our movement, in the environmental movement and in the climate movement and in other social movements, of course. Young people are asking questions like, what are the root causes of climate change and the climate crisis and other global challenges? Where are the knowledge and the skills to solve the climate crisis at those root causes? Who should be actually making decisions about how we tackle climate change? And who should be actually holding power in these systems that dictate the ways that we live? And so after these uprisings and with this inflow of questions, especially on social media, everywhere you looked, it was very introspective. I became very deeply interested in issues that were concerning climate justice in Miami. So climate justice refers to the intersection of climate change and social justice. So I started learning more about climate gentrification, which is pictured, a protest related to climate gentrification is pictured here. I started learning more about that, which is actively pushing Miami-Dade County residents, specifically Black and Brown families, out of their homes as wealthy investors are grabbing high ground. I started learning more about farm workers and homestead as well, who are at greater risk for health problems as our days are getting hotter in Miami with climate change. And I started learning more in general about how those who live in more vulnerable populations and rely on things like public transportation and affordable housing, how the climate crisis is going to further compromise those things for them. And it's going to drive the wealth gap even further here. And so I started making the connection between climate change and social justice like I never really did before. And it's all thanks to young people, again, who called upon the climate movement to center social justice in its efforts after the murder of George Floyd. And as we speak right now, young people are transforming the climate movement into the climate justice movement. It's a total rebranding, and it's incredibly important that we recognize that young people, particularly of color, are the people who are doing this. And so after that, I decided to join some other really cool people who care about advancing social justice through climate solutions. And shortly after the uprisings last summer, me and some other young people formed the Miami chapter of the Sunrise Movement. So in this space, we're working to make sure that Miami tackles the climate crisis through a just transition, where we actually take this opportunity to provide working class people good paying jobs in energy and infrastructure, affordable housing, reliable public transit, good healthcare, and all these other things that Miami really needs and that we could get as we solve the climate crisis and revitalize our economy. And so getting involved with young people like this made me take my environmentalism to another level. I started incorporating things like storytelling, which I'm attempting to do a little bit of right now, militant optimism. So, you know, something Xavier mentioned earlier on this call was that this room is filled with optimism, visioning sessions, really wildly imagining what the world could look like and not really holding back. All those things I started to incorporate into my climate work in my advocacy and even at my job at Clio and with the students that I work with. And because of that, and because of the young people that taught me this, I now envision a world where everybody has access to an environment where they can thrive and not just survive. And it's really, again, young people my age and younger and older who helped me envision this and show that they want this. And so to achieve that type of world, I've learned that we need intersectionality. We need a multiracial cross-class movement. We need proper representation of the needs of people. And we need a movement that really creates and demands fair solutions. And the good news is that really none of this is that new. We just need to look back at history. And when we look back at the civil rights movement, we learn that this sort of movement is possible and it actually works because young people of color or not of color, young people in general have always led social movements and they were told always that what they wanted was impossible, but it wasn't because of the world that we live in today. And the same can be done for the climate crisis. And so you're probably wondering, okay, what's next, right? And like, how does Gabby materialize all this stuff that she spoke about and that I envision for the world that I live in? One day, I was reading a book and I read this quote, and it reads, "When you're close to the problem, you're necessarily close to the solutions." And this statement really struck me because first I thought about myself. As a young person in Miami, I'm living at ground zero for the climate crisis. I'm not incredibly wealthy, so I don't have protection from these issues. And I thought about how I've used that threat as being a young person in Miami as credibility to speak on this issue and help advance solutions in my local community. But I also started thinking a little bit beyond me, and I started thinking about those in Miami who are actually close to the problems of climate change and are experiencing it right now. And I'm talking about mothers in Little Haiti and farm workers in Homestead and homeless people in Miami Beach. And I thought about how these people know the solutions because they live with those problems firsthand every day. And so in this moment, when I read this quote, I really solidified what I wanted to do with my life next. As a young person working in the climate movement, I realized that I want to make those who are close to the problem forming the solutions, right? I want to center social equity in the climate solutions that we talk about, particularly for Miami. And I want to help uplift our most vulnerable communities and give them the leadership they need to help create this just and sustainable city that we live in. So that's what I'm up to now. A few weeks ago, as Adam and Xavier mentioned, I graduated and I submitted my senior projects and I graduated from FIU. And I focused my last semester on climate justice, specifically on climate gentrification and Indigenous knowledge. And now I'm off to Yale. I'll be pursuing a Master of Environmental Management at the Yale School of the Environment this fall. And like I said, I'll be focusing on centering social equity and climate solutions for coastal communities. And I definitely intend to bring that back to Miami. It is the entire reason that I'm doing what I'm doing. And so I kind of just want to end this presentation by saying, as a young person, I have brought my perspective to the table and I've made a local impact through education and through advocacy. I have quite literally poured parts of my youth into this crisis. And I intend to continue doing that alongside the other incredible young people that have lifted me up. But it's really worth noting that despite everything I talked about, the single thread throughout this is that young people have built me to be the person I am today. And throughout all of that, young people have done something for me and for this movement and for all of us here that I feel no other group can do. And it's that young people can unapologetically and relentlessly imagine. They imagine better communities, systems, and worlds with a blank slate, and they go for it. They just ask for it. And young people have taught me that this specific quote is something that I learned while through some sunrise thing, and it's, we can be whatever we have the courage to see. And I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, so thank you.
Gabby, that has been one of the most inspirational presentations ever made at an underwater HOA meeting. I celebrate you. Really inspirational and motivating, because you embody the very group of individuals that we are doing all this for. It is when you are living in 2050 and 2060, good chance I won't be living in 2060, that these problems are going to be bigger and tougher. And unless we begin to think of you, Gabby, living in 2060, and your daughter or son living in 2090, 2099, that we lose sense of who we are in our humanity. So I just want to thank you for being so inspiring, and I know that you will bring all this back to us here. Are there any questions for Gabby? Yeah, Anne?
First, an easy one, which is I was curious where you studied in Costa Rica, because I did the Centro Cultural and got my minor in Spanish there. And I agree with you 100% that the impact of seeing the environmental issues down there with the big giant logs rolling out of the big forests. I was curious what institute or what facility you were at.
So I didn't do a conventional study abroad where I studied at a university there. I did like a 2-month trip. And so it was still under FIU, and my education per se there, my vacation or whatever you want to call it, was led by a tour guide the entire time.
Nice.
And so it was all active learning. There was never like sitting in a classroom type thing. It was, you know, adventure tourism, but also tours of farms and different facilities and energy centers. So don't really have an answer for your question, but definitely agree. It's totally different when you see it in person.
I would say that your summer consisted of field work.
Yeah, I mean, and volunteer work actually. Yeah, we also did volunteer work. So we worked with a lot of schools and children. It was awesome.
It's an incredible country. And I can't wait to find out what you bring back from Yale. I wish I could be a fly on the wall up there.
Thank you. Yeah.
Anyone else with a question for Gabby?
Gabby, well, first I want to say thank you. That was awesome. I agree with it, what Xavier said. Love hearing everything they had to say. I feel like we're super aligned, and you know, I mean, I see you at our sunrise calls, and so I know the gist of you. I feel at this point, so I'm super excited that, or I'm just glad and thankful that we were able to bring you here to, you know, spread that message. One thing that I feel doesn't get talked about enough, and that I know you're passionate about, is bringing Indigenous knowledge into the conversation. So I'm just wondering if you would want to kind of expand on that a little bit, just because I feel like it's something that most people don't really think about.
Sure, yeah. So I'm still learning about it first and foremost, but I'll say this. So I, in the last year, have, like Adam said, gained a lot of interest in learning about Indigenous communities, but it's not something that I was able to do through my education at FIU. So it's one of the things that I hope to do at Yale, and just learn more about their history and colonization and how that's tied to the exploitation of land and water, but also the irony, which is that these are our longest defenders and healers of the land. And, you know, asking questions like, so if these people have so much environmental knowledge and have been doing this for so long, and we've taken that knowledge from them, how do we kind of, you know, integrate that knowledge back into the decisions we make today about climate and about the environment? if you don't really know about that, I don't really know if I have the expertise to lecture on it. But for me, it really struck me because Indigenous people, like I said earlier, have a lot of traditional ecological knowledge that needs to be tapped into. I did an entire project about their role in climate change mitigation adaptation strategies. So I researched 7 different case studies around the world of Indigenous people who showed proven examples of them adapting to and mitigating climate impacts. So, for example, in one area, this Indigenous group relied on this plant that had gone extinct because of more droughts and extreme heat due to climate change, and they were able to completely revitalize their agriculture system based off their own knowledge. And just concepts like that, of where they have proven strategies, like nature-based strategies, how can we take those and how can we apply them to communities like Miami, and at a larger scale, just combating the climate crisis in general. I think there's a lot of missed potential not working with Indigenous peoples. I think at the same time, not looking at it from a selfish lens, right? Because everything I've been saying is for our own protection to solve the climate crisis. They deserve reparations. They have been cultural and environmental genocide for centuries, still today. Their knowledge has been erased. And obviously this is ideology now, but they deserve to be at the forefront of the climate movement and incorporating their knowledge and skills, because they've been protecting the planet for so long for us. That was probably a little bit all over the place, but I hope that kind of gave you all some context.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else?
No question, but just to echo what has already been said, really. It's so refreshing to have someone speak so positively about, these issues, because I think there's a lot of us who just feel a bit in despair a lot of the time. So it's great that, your age group is just there feeling empowered to do what you do. So, and we're all trying, and just thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you for saying that. And at the same time, you're totally right. But at the same time, it's definitely worth noting that so many people my age are not empowered, right? And are filled with dread and anxiety. And I think one of the best things that we can all recognize and do is teach people how to take that anxiety. Because I still have it some days. I'm sure Adam has it too, gets mad about certain things that we see. But how to identify that despair and channel it into something is really critical. But yeah, thank you so much for saying that.
Along that same line, if you don't mind, because I know, again, Indigenous knowledge in climate change is something that you are very interested in, but also the intersection between climate and mental health, I think, is something that you care a lot about. And I think that speaks to what Carl was saying in terms of having, people that are just in despair. What, I guess, from everything that you've learned and all the people that you've talked to, what's maybe a couple of tips that you would give someone who's feeling overwhelmed or depressed given the situation?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to find other people, and I think that goes for most feelings that are related to mental health, like depression and anxiety and whatnot. I really don't think I would have gotten over my fear of climate change or even talking about it or thinking about it if it wasn't for meeting other people who understood that as well and were doing something about it. So I would say that's definitely the first thing, like what we're all doing right now, like finding a home base and finding an advocacy group or just anything like that is so fulfilling, because anything you feel, like, you channel into this, you channel into your Zoom meetings, you channel into the whatever you're working on. So definitely that. And I also think that the second thing on my head right now is don't make this your life, which is really hard to say. And it's something that I didn't really understand at first, because when I first started working in the climate justice movement, like probably for the first few months, it's all I did, like literally 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. If I wasn't working, I was on social media, or I was reading articles about it. I was watching YouTube videos about it, anything, reading books about it. And I think after those first few months, I realized like, yes, this is the greatest existential threat of our lives. But you also only get one life. And I think it's important to recognize that there's only so much you can do, and to remember that you're a human being, and to spend time with your family and your friends and eat and work out and take care of yourself. That's all part of mental health. So I think that's the second thing I would say, like, if you're feeling that way, definitely recognize the amount of time you spend on this, and don't make it your life completely.
That's great advice, by the way. Yeah, I can really connect with that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, I wanted to tell you something, Gabby. So you spoke a lot, and with reason, about how you can are inspired and inspire your generation, and how that works. But what I think I want you to understand is that that ripple effect goes way beyond people born in your generation. Adam was 10 years old when I was doing massive eco art projects, right? So I have been at this for a while. But when he became my intern, and then eventually, a student, and then eventually employee, he in really profound ways motivated and inspired me to continue fighting forward, and even push and revitalize many of the eco art projects that I had launched before. So the power of you in impacting your professors at Yale, the power of you in inspiring your executive director at the nonprofit, at Clio, actually it's my favorite environmental nonprofit, period, in Miami-Dade County. The power of you in really giving those who've been fighting this fight longer than you were born, and I'm talking people older than me, obviously, then is important. And I think that's how we help heal ourselves. And too often we go at it alone, and we strive and we work and we burn, sometimes we burn bridges. Most of the time we burn ourselves out. But those are also very wise words from a young person about taking care of yourself. So Adam tries to tell me to do that all the time. One of these days I'll listen. Maybe I'll listen to you instead of him. Good words. Good words. Anyone else have anything to share before I ask Jamal and Adam to just wrap up what they've been doing and what's up on our calendar? Well, Gabby, thank you so much. Really, you were truly inspirational. I want you to be contagious in the sense of getting your passion to. I shouldn't use that word during the pandemic, but I want the passion you feel to really spread and resonate in other people's lives. So
I don't think she can help doing that.
Right? I know.
Oh, thank you, X. Thank you so much for just giving me a platform to continue doing so. I appreciate it. Thanks
Yeah,
so
you were
much.
invited here, by the way, not as a Clio employee. I don't know how many times you get invited as you, but you were invited here as you, right? You're not here because of the role you have. You're here because of who you are and what you're doing. So I don't know if this is your first sort of public, your first of what I know will be many, many public presentations, not representing an organization, but just out of your worth and your value. But it resonated a lot with me. So own that too, right? Own your greatness. Okay.
Definitely. Thank you.
Sure. So Jamal, I know you're working and doing some stuff with visualizations, trying to map the topography of our community, doing some visualizations, hopefully. Any updates on that for the group? What you're working on for our website? What do you think you're going to be done?
I don't have any updates. I've been really busy with final projects.
Sure. Great. So next month when we meet again, love to hear where where you're going to take our resources page, because I want people to be able to go there and see City Hall at El Portal and what the elevation is, and we already did all the research on the elevation of every single public school. I'd love to be able to map that, and just so thankful to you for doing that kind of work for us, along with the other, putting the articles and all the stuff we talked about. So soon that will come to our page. So thanks you for doing that, Jamal. And Adam, I know that we're putting together some speakers for summer? Have we had solid confirmations? I know we have speakers, but I don't know if we have the dates for the speakers. Any news on that, or should we just wait for our next newsletter?
No,
I can speak on that.
Yeah, go for it, Jamal.
Yes, so for June 2nd, the monthly meeting, we're going to have Dr. Keen Hayward, and who's a senior lecturer in the Department of Marine Ecosystems and Science and Society at the Rosenthal School of Marine and Atmospheric Science at the University of Miami. He'll be giving a presentation on applying citizen science and exploration to sea level rise.
Wonderful. Yeah, he's a great professor at our university, so really excited to have him here. Great. So everyone, we'll see each other at 7 p.m. on June 2nd. I trust it will still be on Zoom, and we'll try to get off Zoom as soon as we can. Again, thanks, and have a great day, everyone.